All right. This is the Falsifiable Podcast. I'm your host, Eric Denton. Today I have with me Dr. Michael Shermer. He is the founding publisher of Skeptic Magazine, the host of the podcast, The Michael Shermer Show, and a presidential fellow at Chapman University where he teaches Skepticism 101. Do you still do that, Michael?
No, that actually a year now. My contract ended last spring of 2023, which was fine. They didn't want to renew because I think they realized they were for what they were paying me, they could hire three young adjunct professors.
Right. But
Universities are really big businesses now. They have to make money, and anyway, it's all right. It was a 140-mile drive each way from my house in Santa Barbara all the way down to Orange County. So
oh yeah.
that's a long time. That's like two Joe Rogan podcast episodes of a drive.
Right. And you've written books, bestsellers, Why People Believe Weird Things, The Believing Brain, Why Darwin Matters. And the most recent one was Conspiracy, which is what we sort of talked about last time. And actually, I listened to your Skepticism 101, what is it, the Great Courses
Yes, the great
earlier.
courses, right? I produced that a number of years ago now.
That was
Yeah.
great. That's a great summation of all of your
Well, thank
books in
you.
a lot of ways. Yeah, I really got a lot out of it. I've read two of your books in the last like 4 days, and I've listened
Oh,
to
wow.
that. So I've got Michael Shermer is on
On the
my brain
brain.
right now.
Sorry.
Oh no, it's okay. Let me see here. I wanted to talk about this though. Let me find it. Um, I'm gonna read something here. This actually comes from your book, one of your books. And it's where is it here? It's do 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 do. I read your book on my phone, which is normally I don't do that, but let me see.
Yeah, the phone. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, this comes from your book. Millions by the way, this is the what uh book was this? This is the Believing Brain, which is great. Millions of Mormons believe that their sacred text was dictated in an ancient language onto gold plates by the angel Moroni and buried and subsequently dug up near Palmyra, New York,
Palmyra,
by
New York. Yeah.
Palmyra, New York, by Joseph Smith, who then translated them into English by burying his face in a hat containing magic stones. Millions of Scientologists believe eons ago a galactic warlord named Xenu brought alien beings from another solar system to Earth, placed them in select volcanoes around the world, and then vaporized them with hydrogen bombs, scattering to the winds their thetans, which are souls, which attach themselves to people today, leading to drug and alcohol abuse, addiction, depression, and psychological and social ailments that only Scientology can cure. And my question to you is, given what we know about the charlatans that started both of these, what I would call cults, why do people believe such things?
Wow, that's an open-ended question. Do they really believe it? That's one place to start. And what does it mean to believe something? It could be that it's a kind of a proxy belief. It's a stand-in. It's more of a tribal belief, that kind of thing. The way I characterize a lot of conspiracy theories, most people have no way of knowing whether it's literally true or not, and but it's part of something my tribe or my religion or my political party believes, so I'll just go along with it. And as I might have discussed in a previous episode with you, is studies on cognitive psychology about what people know and how they kind of signal their belief in things publicly. Most people don't understand the things that they say they believe. Like I think NAFTA is a good thing, or I think NAFTA is a bad thing. If you ask people, well, what is it? They don't actually know. Much like that viral video the other day of the camera crew asking that student at Columbia, why are you protesting? And she really couldn't articulate. She kind of giggles and turns to her roommate, like, yeah, why are we out here again? What is this for?
Right.
I don't know,
Yeah.
but or since you want to talk about evolution a little bit later, Andrew Stillman's research on, asking college students, do you accept the theory of evolution? They pretty much do.
Mm.
Okay, explain it. How does it work? Well, they actually don't know how it works. They give some Lamarckian explanation of the giraffe stretches its neck and the babies have longer necks. It's inheritance of acquired characteristics, not how it works. And but so what they're doing there is signaling, I mostly trust what the scientists say, or politicians usually are honest, or the media mostly gets it right, or when people, or the opposite, if people don't trust, so whether they know it or not is a different thing. Now, in the case of those two examples, um, when I challenge Scientologists or Mormons about those stories, they usually say something like, "Oh, I don't know. That's not important to me. It's just, it helps me. My religion, it helps me, and it feels good, and my friends and family are all in it, and that's why it's important to me. I know the Galactic Warrior story is kind of crazy, or Joseph
Mm.
Smith and the magic stones. Yeah, maybe it's not literally true, something like that you'll get. Now, Christians, on the other hand, I've been pushing this idea recently that, that asking whether the resurrection really happened, or these, miracles of turning the water into wine, walking on water, raising the dead, and so on, do they have to be literally true to be meaningful to you?
Mm. Mhm.
And I use, kind of an analogy with literary truths or mythic truths. Myths are, by definition, they're not true. They're stories. They're stories that have deeper truths,
Mm.
mythological truths, or, truths about human nature and human society and human relationships, much like great literature does. And so to ask if, some character in a Jane Austen novel really lived, in this house and had this relationship, you're missing the point of the story.
Right.
And so I think a lot of religious stories should be read in that context. They're not literally true. There wasn't a great fish or a whale that Jonah was swallowed by and spent 3 days in the belly of the beast. And how was that possible? Or it's a miracle. How about it never happened? That's not the
Right.
point. That's not the point. And, here I'm willing to grant religious people, um, the right way, not that, that's not the way to say it, because who cares what I think, but it's okay to go ahead and believe that in a mythical sense, in a
Mm.
literary, like a literary truth. It has deeper truths and meanings about human life and your life, and morals and values and things like that. Okay, fine. But when I float this idea with Christians, they're not too keen on it. Their feeling is that if Jesus wasn't literally raised from the dead, there's no point in being a Christian. That's what they tell
Right.
me.
Right.
And it's like, wow, okay. That's a pretty big ask, because, there's not a lot of evidence for it. There's pretty much none external to the Bible. And anyway, so that's how I've been thinking about those kind of claims.
Well, it's funny you say that because I watched an interview with Bart Ehrman the other day, and he was
Mhm.
talking about you literally you can't read the Bible literally. You get into two chapters, and you're already going to have to start interpreting because in Genesis 1 it says that man was created after everything. Genesis 2 or chapter whatever it is
Mhm.
immediately negates that, and it puts them up front, and then
Mhm.
vegetation, and also. And if you take this literally, of course, they would suffocate because there's no photosynthesis and there's no,
Right.
you know.
Right.
And I was talking to a buddy of mine, actually, he was on the last episode, and he and I are really good friends, but he's a pastor, a Southern Baptist pastor, and he is a fundamentalist, and he doesn't use this word pejoratively. He actually uses it as it'd be like a liberal saying they're a neoliberal. Like it's like,
Mm.
what? I've never heard anybody articulate themselves like, but he actually uses it as a positive, and I pointed this out to him, and he said, "Oh, well, no, it said it whenever it's talking about uh he started interpreting, he says, well, he's talking about agriculture was kicking in or something. He was making like these,
Mm.
and I was like, but again, you're already see what you're having to do there is you're having to infer something, and we already know that agriculture didn't. It was like 10,000 years ago, and you're already claiming that it was 6,000 years ago. It just gets all crazy, and this
Mhm.
is goes to Ehrman's point, which is you can't read it literally. You have to just take on the truths, the moral truths, perhaps, and go with that. And a lot of people do that and it seems to work for them. But to try to, uh, you know, do this jujitsu with your mind on it, just good Lord, it takes a lot. But
Well, another a recent theme I've seen, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, for starters, becoming a Christian, at least her initial statement and a couple of comments after that as well, have been more of a pragmatic kind of truth claim about Christianity. That's the one worldview that will push back against the crazy left, the woke progressives, the Islamicists, the terrorists, and so on and so on. At least they have values that I can respect. They embrace Western values. Well, but that's not a good reason to believe that, that God exists and Jesus was literally raised from the dead and so on. I mean, you can take elements of a particular worldview and say, well, this is what works here. This doesn't work so well. We'll cobble it together, which is how politics works. And that's what we've been doing for centuries, is saying, okay, let's just try different experiments and see what works, and then we'll try something else if it doesn't work. And that's how we've ended up with Western civilization with the values we have. Is most of them are pretty good, and not perfect, not utopia, but protopia. Just a little bit, just keep changing
right.
things, make it a little bit better, and so on. And then yeah, it was somebody else. Oh, the trigonometry guys were commenting that they're not becoming religious, they're not Christians, but they're saying, those atheists, new atheist movement, has really failed us because it didn't. Either they suggested it kind of launched the kind of postmodern woke progressive,
Right.
kind of movement, or it didn't stand up to it. Either way. Well, that's not the origin. First of all, atheism isn't a worldview. It's not a position. It's nothing. It's just saying I don't believe in God. We'll stop.
Right.
What we believe in is a very positive worldview. As call it what you will, secular humanism. I call it Enlightenment humanism, but you could just
Mm,
call it classical liberalism. Really, that's what it is. A positive assertion about civil rights, equal treatment under the law, equality of opportunity, women's rights, gay rights, property rights, and the rule of law, and so on. All the stuff that we, free speech and freedom of assembly, and all the stuff in the Bill of Rights. Those are all positive assertions about things that everybody can believe: atheists, agnostics, deists, pantheists,
right.
Christians, Scientologists, anybody. And it's not that atheism gave us the Nazis or the Russians and communism or whatever. It's because it's not a worldview. It doesn't stand for anything. It just
Right.
says we don't believe in God. That's it.
Yeah, and it's funny you say that about the new atheists bringing on postmodernism and all. I have actually heard this same criticism, and I'm like, well, actually, all the new atheists, or the people that were, named new atheists, like Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, Hitchens, these were the most anti postmodern people
Yes,
and
yes,
are the, Dawkins and
yes,
Harris, who are still
yes.
living. There's nobody more anti-postmodern than these individuals. And but I have seen that conflated. And for instance, like I've had some religious friends say to me, the nuns are growing, like the people that are not religiously affiliated, but it seems to me that it's just all these people going woke and all this kind of stuff. I'm like, yeah, but that's not. This is an error in philosophy. This is bad philosophy. This is an error in thinking. This has nothing to do with rationality or the atheism, or as you say, atheism is just, it's literally, it's not a worldview. It's just the
Right.
negation of, not believe, or we're not believing in gods or supernatural things. And yeah, so it's kind of crazy. Actually, this reminds me, I'm going to segue just, or go on a tangent real quick. Speaking of what we just said, and I just watched this right before we got on. I'm just going to comment on it, and you can comment on this or not. But so Russell Brand, did you see his recent conversation with Jordan Peterson?
No, I didn't see it. Give me a
Okay, so
synapse.
I
Sorry,
just watched a little bit of
synopsis.
it. Yeah, I just
Yeah.
watched a little bit of it, and the main thing I took away from it was he just recently got baptized. And he's talking about how it was the most amazing thing he's ever experienced, and then all this, and he's talking to his viewers, like, it's like, oh man, this was the greatest thing ever, and he's like, and the material world just didn't have what I needed. It just didn't wasn't enough, and all this kind of stuff. And I'm sort of thinking like, well, what what more? I mean, the material world, if you just even look a little bit, it's the most fascinating thing on the planet. So I don't understand what more could you want? But I have a theory here, which is that it seems to me that there is something going on with these type of influencers where they're being, I could be wrong and see what you say about this, but they're being captured by their audience. They sort of dabble with these conspiracy theories, or they notice that they're being really loved suddenly by religious people, and all of a sudden, like, they're getting a lot of emails, perhaps like, "Oh, we're praying for you," and he actually mentions that people were like praying for him and all this kind of stuff, and he
Mm,
can just feel their prayers.
mm,
And do you have a theory on what's going on with this? Because it's happening with a few influencers, and I
mm.
can name names, but I'll stop
Yeah,
right here.
yeah, sure. Well, first of all, I don't, know what someone's internal motive is just to get more clicks and eyeballs and so on by being more and more outraged or taking more and more extreme positions here and there, flip-flopping or changing, whatever. That's possible, but let's assume that Russell Brand is genuine in his. I guess he's converted, right? He says he's a Christian now or
Well,
Catholic or
no, that's the
what?
thing, is he's ambiguous on that. Again, sort of
Oh.
like the Peterson take, where it's like you ask him and it's just this nebulous,
Well, if you're
like
baptized into what? I mean,
right. The
well, I mean, it's
Catholic.
usually conducted by a religion.
Right. I read an article on it right before we got on. I was looking really quickly in the Catholic Church. Somebody in the Catholic Church wrote an article, or somebody or something Catholic, and they said, well, we don't know what he was converted, baptized into. He didn't really
Yeah.
say, but he was
I
baptized.
don't know. I don't know Russell at all. I haven't followed him that closely, but didn't he have drug problems and
Yes.
various mental issues and stuff? A lot of people turn to religion for some kind of social structure, psychological structure and order in the chaos of the world, and particularly when they're down. I mean, it's a pretty typical conversion to religion story, right? I was down and out. I lost everything. I was hooked on drugs and sex and gambling and the whole thing. And then I found God, and now everything's great. Okay. For you in a pragmatic truth sense, okay, good for you.
Mm.
It's I'm glad you're not, out on the street again and you're addicted to drugs or whatever it takes. I mean, and Scientology made some claims about that as well. They got a lot of people off of psychiatric drugs as well as drug addiction, and so Synanon and Narcanon and those organizations back in the 70s and 80s helped get people off of addiction and alcohol. Okay, fine. But again, that's a different kind of claim than, do you really believe it? Like literally it's true. I mean, the baptism, getting
Right.
baptized is actually going to save your soul. Do you believe you have a soul that's going to survive and float off your brain and into the ether somewhere? And because you were baptized, you get to go this good place. And I
Yeah.
don't know what he would say about that.
Well, I think it's funny. As you say, and I follow you, Michael, and you don't, you're right. You actually post things that some of it, much of it actually is provocative. It's not provocative to me per se, because I tend to agree with it, but I can see why it would be provocative when you're pushing against this trans ideology and stuff like that. But I think that I can tell with people that are, you're like a public intellectual, and with you, I can totally tell that you have an honest approach here, and you're just trying your best to inoculate people against BS, or and everybody, sometimes you might have a selfish thing where nobody's perfect, but for the most part, I just look at Michael Sherman, I think this guy is trying to do something good, and then there's some other people I always see. It's like you notice a change where you're thinking, okay, then their audience grows, and suddenly they start, everything, just this shift starts forming,
Mm,
and this actually leads to this idea of there's all these philosophers, or excuse me, these professors that are now in the wild, and they're all started podcasts and all these things, and
mm,
but now they're not being fact checked by their peers anymore. They're just being
right.
listened to by the masses, and it's just, it seems it's a little problematic, and especially for somebody like me who doesn't have a voice, and I'm just watching this like, oh my gosh, and I'm trying not to be provocative myself, because I don't want that sort of I want an honest approach too, but it's like the clickbait thing just kind of
Mhm.
takes people's brains. Do you
It
notice
does,
that at
yes.
all or?
Yeah, and influencers, just the economic model of how the internet works is you have to be outrageous pretty much every day.
Right.
And,
Right.
I mean, I'm old enough now. I mean, when I was, writing my Scientific American column, 18 years, 214 consecutive monthly column, that was a lot. That was plenty. Once a month, I could think about it, ruminate and cogitate, do a little research and write it up, get it out there. And now that would be like a glacier moving.
Right.
Right now, I feel like, then it's every week. And now I almost feel like I really need to crank out stuff every day. Yeah,
Right.
and even that, I follow people online. They're like every 2 hours they're posting something, and it's
Man.
like this is just astonishing. So, and I'm not an influencer or anything like that. So, I can imagine if you have a massive following and you feel pressure, like, well, this is my job. I got to get up this morning and start cranking stuff out. Then you're
Mm.
just, I mean, how much research have you put into it? I don't know. I mean, the few clips I've seen of Russell Brand, he seems a little scattered, not scattered. I don't know, hyper. He,
Right.
he bounces around a lot, and he's a comedian, and he's funny, and yeah. But so I never know, if he's saying something deep and meaningful, or if he's just bullshitting.
Yeah, well, it seems to me right whenever I saw that they were talking to one another, he and Peterson, I was like, this is going to be the epic word salad. I mean, this is just because Jordan Peterson, I think, we can all admire his push against, certain irrationalities, but when it comes to the religious stuff, as Dawkins said on a recent interview, he just called it flat out bullshit.
Yeah, yeah.
And Dawkins, Richard Dawkins is very kind to him on other things, and why not? I mean, we all want to be civil, and I think that's the way to go. But it is, I think I'm with Dawkins on just calling some of that other stuff out though, because he just starts rambling, and it's so impressive to people. And I read a lot of Karl Popper. I'm actually trying to write a book about Karl Popper's work, so I'm just
Hmm.
enveloped with it. And Popper always pushes against Hegel, and he just says that this guy is just nothing but empty verbiage. And because it's just sentences that are just, I don't know if you've ever tried to read Hegel, but it's like sentences that are
Hmm.
100 words long
Hmm.
that
Paragraph long sentences. Yeah.
basically have no meaning. And it's like,
Therefore, furthermore, and moreover.
right.
What?
I think actually, I think Steven Pinker actually talks about this in one of his books. He might even use Hegel. I could be wrong, but like the language
Bad
instinct or
writing.
something. Yeah, and it's just like this massive sentence, and it's
Yeah.
like, what does this mean? I have no idea.
Right. Yeah.
But with
Yeah.
some,
So yeah, I saw Jordan one of his podcasts where he was talking about the question, does God exist? Well, what do you mean by exist?
hmm,
So he kind of went down that road, but I could sort of see where he was going, like because he actually said this. It's like if you mean does God exist, like the table here exists. Well, no.
right,
Okay, then all right, fine, good. Then what are we talking about when you say God exists? If you mean just people believe in God and those gods are real, the gods
hmm,
in the heads of people that believe in God, those gods are real because people act on those beliefs. Okay. Is that what you mean?
right,
Because I'll agree with that. I'm a theist in that case. I believe in the gods that live in people's heads. Yeah, those are real. But that's of course not what we want to know in science and correspondence theory, theory of truth and
yes,
this kind of stuff. There has to be some, engagement with the real world beyond people's thoughts in their heads, even if it affects them. So and again, I'll grant people the power of mythic beliefs, fine. But or pragmatic beliefs, it works for me. I guess I believe in God or I believe in free will, even though it's an illusion, whatever it may be. Okay,
right.
fine, but don't claim, don't claim you've proven that your position is true.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So I'm sorry to get off on that tangent. I just
Oh,
had
that's okay. No,
it
that's all
was on
good.
my brain.
Yeah,
So I'm gonna sort of segue us into this Tucker Carlson thing, which I don't know. Did you watch that interview, by the way?
I saw just a few snippets of it where he
Yeah.
was spouting off about evolution. Yeah, I've followed this for decades, as you know, and people seem to just jump right in and think they understand something about this particular science, although they wouldn't comment so frivolously about geology, setting, or
Right.
quantum physics. I've been giving some thought to quantum physics, and I just don't think it could be true. Oh, really? And what do you know about this subject?
Right.
Can you like even remotely steel man what Darwin's theory of natural selection actually argues? As I mentioned before, no, most people can't.
Right.
So, normally what they're reflecting, if it's not a religious pushback against evolution, which I think Carlson's is not because he's
Hmm.
religious, right? I actually don't know,
I don't
but
either. Yeah.
wasn't he making an argument of from improbability? It just seems impossible that this could have all come together by chance.
Well, he said, actually, here are the quotes, just so we
Oh
know.
yeah, good.
I
Yeah,
wrote
yeah.
them down. He says,
Okay, yeah, read them. Yeah.
here's quote. This is exactly what he says. The theory of evolution as articulated by Darwin is kind of not true. And then he goes, there's no evidence at all, none, zero, that people evolved seamlessly from a single-celled amoeba. There's no chain in the fossil record of that at all. The theory of adaptation is clearly true, which what I mean, what again, what's he
Huh?
saying here? And then he goes on to imply once again that Darwin's theory is totally false, and that's why it's still a theory, which is
Yeah.
the old
Right.
canard, it's only
Yes.
a
Yes.
theory.
Only a theory. Yeah.
But as you say there, as we see there, he says there's no evidence at all, zero,
Right.
and
Right.
just so absolute about this. And the reason that this sort of was, first of all, Joe Rogan, who's, I mean, I don't actually really watch Joe Rogan a whole lot, but it was sad because he couldn't push back against this,
Mm.
and it's sad to see that because you're like, oh man, this guy with this massive platform can't push back this about this simple
Hmm.
fact. And it goes to what you were saying. And I'm going to read something here. And you've definitely heard this. This comes from Steven Pinker. He says, professing a belief in evolution is not a gift of scientific literacy, but an affirmation of loyalty to a liberal secular subculture as opposed to a conservative religious one. And I like what he says there because it's kind of like the idea of when we talk about uh, climate change or something, people will say, "Oh yeah, climate change is real," but even the people that are confirming that it's real can't say anything about it that makes any sense. You'll say, "Oh well, what's causing it?" They'll be like, "Oh, I've just heard things." You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
it's just
Yeah.
like, and I see somebody like Carlson with this massive platform say something like this, and it's just reaffirming in the minds of the credulous that, oh yeah, Darwin's completely not real. I mean,
Yeah.
his,
Yeah. No evidence. Tucker said so.
right, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I think there's a couple things going on there. Maybe it's not religious. Although I don't know him personally or what his religious beliefs are. He mentioned something in that interview with Putin. Do you think there's anything spiritual and going on here? And Putin's like, no. What? No.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I was like, huh, what's he hinting at there? I mean, he's
Right.
probably religious in some kind of generic sense, which is where most anti-evolutionary arguments come from. The mistaken belief that you have to choose between Darwin and Jesus, say, in which case, no one's going to pick Darwin that is committed to being a Christian. But that's not the choice.
Mm,
It's either true or it's not, regardless of what the implications are for religion or politics or anything else. I mean, there's a whole branch of social Darwinism that was picked up in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, that led to eugenics and nationalism and war as a cleansing process of getting rid of the weaker elements of society and all this stuff, much of which was embraced by liberals at the
mm.
time. And, the whole eugenics movement was very much embraced by liberals in the 10s, 20s, and 30s. It wasn't until after the war, Second World War, that it was like, oh, you know what? This is probably a bad idea.
Right.
And even the Scopes monkey trial, there's an interesting backstory to that. William Jennings Bryan was on the side of the prosecution side against Scopes, who violated the Tennessee state law. You can't teach Darwin's theory in public schools. The ACLU wanted to challenge that, so they're the ones behind the Scopes monkey trial. They set it up
Mm,
to make it a big thing, and it became a media circus. And one of the reasons that William Jennings Bryan said he was against the theory of evolution was because he had read some of the literature in this on this very subject of people who took Darwin's theory and used it as a kind of a social Darwinism
Hmm.
for justifying war and violence and cleansing and ethnic cleansing and things like this, which he was found abhorrent. But of course, you don't blame the theory; you blame the people that misapplied it, which is what a lot of social Darwinism is. So that's part of the problem. People don't have a hard time separating the man or the theory from the people that misuse it for their own political or religious purposes. So that would be one response to Tucker. As for no evidence, well, what is it? All these paleontologists and evolutionary biologists, botanists, zoologists, geologists, what are they doing? I
Right.
mean,
Right.
what's in all those books?
Well, actually, you mentioned something right there, which I love how you talk about this in your books, and you might have coined this. I'm not sure, but you talk about a convergence of evidence, which
Yeah,
is when we're talking about,
it's not my idea, but yeah. Yeah,
I
consilience of
love that though.
inductions or a
Yeah.
convergence of evidence. Yeah, from multiple lines of inquiry. There's no way these guys could all meet on the weekends and go, okay, we got to get our story straight because those Christians are coming out with their story. It's like it's ridiculous. If there were problems with the theory, which there have been here and there, it's not a perfect theory. Darwin didn't explain, he didn't even know about genes and DNA and stuff.
Right.
So those have all been corrected by who? By scientists, right?
Right.
Or, people that mislabel a fossil and turns out it was a tooth and not a toe or whatever, and creationists always jump up and down. Look, they were wrong. Yeah, yeah. You know who found out they were wrong? Other scientists. This is how it
Right.
works, right? It's a constant process.
Oh, yes. And this actually, again, I'm gonna another tangent here because this has been bugging me. Whenever COVID was going on, everybody no I quickly realized that nobody understands how science works because everybody was just like capitalizing, and a lot of unscrupulous people were doing this, capitalizing on all the errors that were going on. And I'm
Hmm.
like, science that's it. It's trial and error. That's how
Hmm.
knowledge grows. That's what Popper would say. And but the problem with what was going on there is like we were in a worldwide emergency, and we were in real time trying to solve issues with fallible people, fallible
Hmm.
scientists, and every time something was a little bit wrong, Tom, Dick, and Harry down the road suddenly thought that they were an epidemiologist, like they're going to talk to science. And I was sitting there thinking, folks, what are and it was were you sort of aggravated by that watching that?
Yep, some of that was one thread. Although here part of the problem is, scientists waiting to decide what's true or not about something is different from a public health official or a politician that has to decide right
Mm,
now, do we close the economy tomorrow or not? Do we close the schools or keep them open? What are we going to do? So truth isn't the question. It's I have to make a decision. So it's a
right.
decision, decision making process. And there, it's hard to make decisions under great uncertainty. So they erred on the side of caution, a precautionary principle, just in case, which it turned out to be a huge mistake, closing these schools and
Right.
not reopening them much sooner, or even worse, the closing the beaches and hiking trails and playgrounds. And I mean, the perfect environment to avoid that very problem,
Right.
be out in the sun with wind and and fresh air and with the trees and the sand and the dirt, and this is all good. And the schools now where kids are 2 years behind, and so that's the cost of making a wrong decision like that. Anyway, that's a sidestep. Yeah, the other thing that bothers people about evolution, I think, is this they have this kind of chain of being
Mm,
metaphor that's been around for thousands of years, back to Aristotle. It's just like one little step at a time, like that time life fold out of the humans. We came from these apes and so on, and it's like, well, that's standard misunderstanding. If humans evolved from apes, why are there apes still around? Because
right.
we didn't evolve from gorillas and chimps and so on. We're all cousins from a common ancestor 6 million years ago and so on. And so that's a misunderstanding. And
Yes.
this idea, I call this the fossil fallacy, that when I was debating Gish one time, he had he said there's gaps in the fossil record. Here's a fossil and here's a fossil. there's a huge gap in the fossil record. So I actually filled the gap. He was talking about, in this case, whales. And that particular week, there's a big paper published in Science when I was debating him about this Ambulocetus natans, this kind of walking, swimming whale-like creature, cow-like whale-like creature, whatever.
Mm.
And I said, there you go. And he goes, now there's two gaps in the fossil record. I know, I want more fossils. And so the more fossils you have, the more gaps there are. And so, I mean, it's just a perverse argument that the
Right.
more evidence there is, the weaker your argument is. Like, no, that's not how it works. And, and nothing would satisfy them in that sense.
Yeah, and I think you had a quote from somebody in Why Darwin Matters that was, yeah, it was in your book, where it was like, well, I'm at least presenting evidence. You have zero evidence.
Yeah,
So it's
right.
like, what are you talking about?
Oh, I do this when I'm debating theists on morality, the origin of morality.
Mm.
I'll go into the whole thing about evolutionary origins of the moral sense of right and wrong, and reciprocal altruism, and game theory, and kin selection, and so on and so forth. And they'll go, yeah, I don't believe it. I said, okay, what's your explanation? Well, God did it. It's like, that's not an explanation.
Right.
You know, how did God do it? I mean, come on. And they don't have an answer. It's
I,
like he just plopped it into us along with free will. Oh, is
right.
that right?
And then a miracle happened.
And
That's
then a
the
miracle happens. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
the
Okay.
this actually something I kind of wanted you to share about this, and this is sticking with evolution. You talk in the beginning of your book, Why Darwin Matters. You talk about a trip that you took to the Galapagos Islands with the science historian Frank Sulloway. Could
Hmm.
you relive that for a moment? Because it was
Oh, yeah, that
interesting.
was a
Yeah.
well. I was just talking to Frank the other day. Actually, we went on an eclipse trip together to Texas to shoot the eclipse last month. It was big
Oh,
fun.
that's
Big fun.
wow.
Yeah, Frank's quite the adventurer. Yeah, so we went. Well, Frank was retracing Darwin's footsteps, and also photographing areas that he had photographed back in the 70s when he first went to compare what the vegetation is like. There's a lot of ecological issues in the Galapagos because it's so heavily traveled with tourists that they have to
Mm,
be very careful about invasive species and things like that, which have been a problem even before tourism. I mean, pirates used to introduce species there, like goats. Goats were left on the islands, and then by sailors, not just pirates, but by other explorers and sailors and so on. And then they, let the population of goats grow, and then they come back and kill them and eat them and whatever. But the goats eat all the vegetation that the tortoises eat.
mm.
So in the case of one of the islands, I think it was San Cristobal, that the Ecuadorian government that runs the islands, owns the islands, they brought hunters out and they shot every last goat.
Oh,
I mean, brutal. I mean, because there was thousands and thousands of goats and they had to shoot them all. And it's like, interesting. I wrote about this in the moral arc in my chapter on animal rights. Whose rights are being violated? These poor little goats, they didn't choose to be there, their nth generation. But the tortoises have been there millions of years. So who has the right to the land? And, it's an interesting problem
mm,
of conflicting rights issues there. But yeah, anyway, and then Frank was also retracing where Darwin went. So we actually went the exact same hike that Darwin took in his first day on the Galapagos, where he landed at this beach next to this volcano on
mm.
San Cristobal. And then we hiked around and we hiked up to the craterized district, as Darwin called it. And it was really something else. It was a hard trip. And I gained a lot of respect for Darwin as a just a physical specimen. I mean, these guys, they didn't
Right.
have all the, Camelback water bottles and all the, carbon fiber super lightweight packs and all this super boots made, and so it's like they were really tough. And
Wow.
yeah, and it's a pretty stark environment. It's right on the equator, so sun comes up at 6 a.m., the sun goes down at 6 p.m., boom, and it's lights out. I mean, you just
Mm.
sleep all night. There's not much to do. And the lava is very, very hard on boots. Slices them all up, and you got to sleep on the lava, and or you carry a pad or whatever. But you got to carry your own water. There's almost no water on the islands. Yeah, it's a pretty tough
That's
trip.
yeah, it reminds me, every time I think of Darwin, I think of that movie. Did you ever see a movie called Master and
Oh
Commander?
yeah, of course. Yeah, they filmed it there. Yeah, it was great.
Oh, they did.
Russell Crowe.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
really love that movie, but it was sort of I mean, they were making an allusion to Darwin, it felt like in that movie.
Yes.
which I thought was really, it was kind of cool. But
Yeah, totally
it
cool. Yeah, that was a Russell Crowe. That was a fun movie. Yeah. Yeah, that was filmed right there at some of the more famous spots there. So when you go to the Galapagos, there you're allowed to go on 64 different places. They have
mm,
designated spots and you have to be with the guide. So every ship is registered, every tourist is registered, unless you have a special permission like Frank got from the Darwin station there, that researchers can apply and say, I'd like to do this research. Here's what I want to do. Here's where I want to go. And then you can get off the beaten path, which is what we did. Otherwise, you have to stay on the beaten path, and they do that for good reason. 'Cause millions of
mm.
people go there and they trample stuff, so you can't touch the animals and things like that. So, but yeah, it's a bucket list place to go for sure. I've been 5 times. I went with Dan Dennett one year. I posted pictures of when Dan died
Oh
last week,
yeah.
and yeah, it's a pretty special place.
Speaking of Dennett, another tangent here. I just listened to the intro. Sam Harris just dropped the podcast. Literally, I was driving earlier and he dropped it and he had a intro where he was talking about his relationship with Dennett. And I was like, oh man, he was I love his writing. But he had this way about him that from a distance he did seem like a guy that was full of life, and he was talking about how you know he just liked to live life, this guy, and he looked like that. He looked like he was the type of guy that you would see fishing or something, out behind his house. And it actually was very moving. I was very moved by the him relating, and he was talking about he didn't really know him all that well, but they were connected obviously because of that, what was going on there. But yeah, that's I'm gonna have to look at your X or what. I don't have X, but I'm gonna look at it and see your photos that you posted. That's kind of cool.
Oh, it is
Um,
cool. Yeah, Dan was a good guy. Yeah, bigger than life is a good way to put it. He was big. I mean, he's like 6'4" or something like that.
yeah,
And yeah, to live 82 is actually pretty good, particularly since he wasn't in great shape. He didn't take that good care of himself physically, I think, and had a lot of medical issues over the years. And yeah, but he would engage with anybody about anything. He's just one of those big, diverse thinkers.
right.
And yeah. So it was, yeah, I was like 10 days with him on a boat in the
Mm.
Galapagos when he was writing Breaking the Spell. And
Mm.
he was telling me about it. So Frank and I said, well, why don't you give a little, people were giving talks at night on the boat. So why don't you give us a little talk about it? So he did. He gave us a summary of his thesis in Breaking the Spell. It was really fun.
Man,
Yeah.
that is
Now, I
awesome.
mean, a lot of people found him arrogant. And my friend David Barish had the greatest line. He was an arrogant man and he had much to be arrogant about.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
I
cool.
mean, he was a super smart guy. I mean, really a deep thinker. And so, okay. But it's not that he was arrogant so much as just enthusiastically wanting to jump in the conversation and have, make his voice heard. And, there has to be some ego in that, I think, obviously.
Right.
But I didn't think he was like a narcissist who was rude to other people. I don't think so at all.
Yeah, I mean, of that crew, he seemed to me, or maybe it was just because he's a little bit older than everybody, but he seemed like the least. I mean, he was unlike Hitchens and Dawkins, who are very forthright. He was definitely not that. He kind of had at least to the public, he had a softer touch. It seemed like to me, even breaking the
Maybe.
spell,
Yeah.
was.
Yeah. 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 Maybe not as confrontational or activist in his beliefs. It was more just intellectual. Although I remember at TED, let's see, this was TED 2006 in Monterey. We were sitting next to each other when Pastor, who's the guy that wrote Purpose Driven Life?
Oh, Rick Warren.
Rick Warren.
Yeah.
And Rick Warren was due to come up. And then Dan was going to speak after. And Dan was like sharpening his knives. Oh boy, I'm gonna have my way with this guy, and I'm gonna, so I'm like, oh, okay. And then Rick Warren just gave, he's such a nice guy. He was just so thoughtful, and he was just such, I don't know, just seemed so conciliatory. And all the money he made from this book, he plowed into charities, and he just wants to help people, and
Hmm.
so on and so on. I'm like, Dan, you can't. This guy's like the world's nicest guy. You can't,
Yeah.
you can go on and destroy him in front of all. These people love this guy. I mean, just easy boy.
Right.
And he did.
Right.
He dialed it back a little bit and said, well, I think, I wished you would have said it this way rather than that way, rather than that's a bunch of bullshit.
Yeah. Right. While we're talking about him, though, the one thing I will say is that with Daniel Dennett, I've read many of his books, and which I think he wrote like three on free will, all of which I just to this day I can't fully wrap my head around his point of view on that. And I've literally read now countless material on it, and for some
Mm.
reason, did you have a hard time wrapping your head
Well,
around his?
Dan's a philosopher, so much of it depends on words,
Right.
lots and lots of words, right?
Yeah.
Words are the data of philosophers, and rightly so. I mean, it's part of rationality is thinking, not
Right.
just looking out the window, which is also important, but actually thinking about what you're seeing out the window. And Dan was quite good at that. If, I don't know what summarize his, but I'll just summarize my position, which is similar to Dan's. It is a compatibilist position.
Mm,
And by the way, it's not that determinism and compatibilism are two different positions. Compatibilism is a way of acknowledging that we live in a determined universe, and yet you still have some volition and choice. How is that? And the answer, in short, I guess, if I were to take like Sam or Sapolsky's position, which seems to turn on, could you have done otherwise?
right.
Okay, so I mean, Sam has this argument about, and actually, Sapolsky makes the same argument that, if you had the exact same atoms as some other, I don't know, serial killer or whatever, you'd be a serial killer too.
Right.
This assumes that, in this, let's rewind the tape and play it again.
Mm,
Well, actually, it was Dan Dennett, because he took Steve Gould's thought experiment there, which Steve used for rewinding the tape of life, play it back from the Burgess Shale, say the Cambrian explosion. Would we end up with something like humans? Well, it depends what you mean by what tape. What kind of tape is it? If it's a read-only memory tape, then yes, it would happen exactly like it did because it's just a copy of what happened. You're
right.
just playing it back. It's like the movie. You're just watching the movie again. I was just watching Gladiator the other night. My wife's like, "You're watching this again?" I said, "I think this time he may not die at the end."
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, yeah, right. Uh, but that's not the universe we live in. We don't live in a world that can be repeated exactly. You can't
Mm,
play back the tape. We live in a world of entropy in the second law, and there's an arrow of time that goes in one direction. So, Heraclitus says you can't step into the same river twice is true because the river is different and you're different.
right.
And the step into the river is different than the last time you stepped into the river, and so on. And so you really can learn from the previous experiences you've had. And however similar the next circumstances are in which you have to make a similar choice, they're not going to be the same
Mm,
exactly. And you're not the same. So you can say, last time I did X, this time I'm going to do Y.
mm,
And that doesn't mean the universe is not determined. It is, but you are actually part of the causal net of the determined universe, making it determined in a different way because it's not the same universe. You can't play it back. You can't, that's my short answer to that.
right. And the only thing is, I would say, and I know what you're saying there, but it is hard still though, because the next time you were to go up against something and you would think, oh, I don't want to make the same mistake. The only reason you have that thought, this is the problem where we get into, is because of the last thing. So it's like because you bumped into that, it's shifting you this way. And had you not bumped into that, it's hard to hang the responsibility on any hook anywhere in the chain. It seems like to me, although we want that because we want a society that has laws and everything, and that's what Dennett was exactly scared
Yeah.
of,
Yeah. Right.
but again, if you look at it deterministically, it is very tough to find out, okay, well, where do we put this thing? And
Well,
uh
again, in levels. Okay. I mean, you wouldn't look for, I don't know, some economic phenomenon like inflation or unemployment in
mm,
the brain. It's in neurons or in the subatomic particles or the atoms, the molecules. You wouldn't look for it on any of those levels. That's not where it
mm,
exists. It
right.
exists as a emergent property of complex adaptive systems of society of interacting people in an economy. That's where unemployment and inflation exists. It's real. It's a real phenomenon. We study it. Economists want to know how they can respond to it and control it and make it go up and down and so on by different policies using, basic statistical methods and, social science tools. Where in the brain are you going to find unemployment and inflation? You're not. Does that
Mm.
mean, it doesn't exist? No, it's real.
Right. Yeah. Oh, I see. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Finally, I was going to say in your book, and you may say this in another book too, but if I'm remembering correctly, you describe knowledge. This is jumping to another subject here, but in conspiracy, you describe knowledge as justified true belief. Do you
Yeah.
do you stand by that?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, pretty much. I mean, there's some debates but amongst epistemologists, you can take entire courses in this and there's entire books on just this subject. What do you mean by justified? What do you
Right.
mean by true? What do you mean by belief? And then you go down the Jordan Peterson route. 6 hours later, you're still
Right.
talking about what the word justified means, right? Okay, I get that. That's fine. But I'm using it in a more practical level. What should I
Right.
believe about anything? And, is there some justification for it? That is there some evidence for it? Is there some good reasons? Does it correspond with the way the world works as far as we could tell? And, does it have some contact with reality? Is there some good, reason to believe it? And, true again, evidence enough that it's would be reasonable to offer your provisional assent is
Mm.
how I define true. It in a Bayesian way, you just put a probability on it. It's probably true. It may be true, might not be true, but never 0 or 1. Cromwell's rule in Bayesian reasoning is never assign a 0 or a 1 to anything. Oliver
Mm.
Cromwell's famous line, "I beseech you in the bowels of Christ, you might be mistaken." Um,
Mm.
so so if you just start there and say, no matter what anybody says, I'm never going to say that's completely false or that's 100% true because
Mm.
you don't know that. Nobody knows that. So you just start there and go, okay, maybe, I think Bigfoot's real. Okay, interesting. Could be. I
Mm.
think the UAP videos represent aliens from another planet. Okay, maybe it's possible. I wouldn't give it a 0. I'd give it maybe a 1%, maybe 0.01%. But I'll change my mind. I'll adjust my priors and adjust my credence accordingly. If you show me something, well, here's this grainy video that looks just like all the other grainy videos. Like, sorry,
Right.
it's just not going to do it for me. Or here's a video of a grainy video of a that may look like a guy in an ape suit, but it could be Bigfoot. Okay,
Mm.
how about just show me an actual body? Let's just see the body of the Bigfoot, the bipedal primate, and that other scientists can see it. We can dissect it and take pictures of it, put it in the zoo, put it in the museum, whatever. Then it's like the Chinese spy balloon story. This is
Mm.
my example of what it would take for me to believe that a UAP represents something real like that. So the equivalent of that, where everybody can see it. The president of the United States, Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, the Pentagon, everybody, yep, that was real. We screwed up. We should have shot this thing down. We should have known what it was before, whatever it is. No one's talking about the credentials of the pilot who shot down the Chinese spy balloon. Oh, how good was his vision? Oh, he was very qualified, and here's his degrees, and so that's irrelevant because everybody knows the balloon's real.
Right.
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 So that's all you would need to know. I mean, the only reason we keep talking about like David Fravor and these other Navy pilots, oh, they're so highly credentialed and they're so experienced. Who cares?
Right.
The reason people care is because we don't actually know what it is they saw. They don't even know what they saw. Therefore, we have to say, well, he's a trustworthy person, or he has really good vision, or he has experience seeing things in the sky. Okay,
Mm.
why do we have to care about any of that? And the answer is because we don't have any idea what it is that's in these videos. But anyways,
Right.
skip that.
No, and the reason I say that is because David Miller, who's a philosopher, he's a Popperian philosopher, he says that it should actually be unjustified, untrue unbelief. And this sounds very counterintuitive, and of course, it's very philosophical language.
All right,
But
give it to me.
I tend to go with this though because there is no way, there is no justification process in science. We can't justify anything. There's no bottom where we're getting all these facts. There is no book of nature that we're just reading. We're actually creating this knowledge within our brains, and it's all conjectural knowledge, though. It's literally so therefore unjustified. There's no way to say, and that's for sure what it is. Untrue is just simply looking at it like this is a weird way to use the word true, but basically saying that it's not certainly true. Again, this is this whole certainty thing. And
Hmm.
then belief, there's no belief comes into science, or it shouldn't. You don't have to really believe anything. There is just good explanations. And I would go with the David Deutsch, who I've love David Deutsch's writing, and
Hmm. Yeah,
he's
me too.
somebody that got me into reading a lot of Popper. He he would say a good explanation is something that's hard to vary. And you're either looking at good explanation or bad explanation. A bad explanation is God did it, because
Mhm.
this
Yes.
explanation works for anything. It can be applied anywhere at any time with anything. You can change every detail and it always works. Whereas a good explanation, you can't change details or the whole thing crumbles. So the best explanations are the ones that forbid the most things, basically. And I tend to like all this because it kind of, when you're talking to somebody about Darwin or evolution and all, we don't have to talk about justifications or anything, because we're just talking about good explanations. And people say, well, why do you think that? I'm like, well, it's the best explanation possible. Is it completely true? It's true right now. It's true enough. But and so it's just, I think that whenever I hear I tend to hear people talk about or people, and actually you don't do this, Michael, but people would say this probably about you. They would intuit. They're like, "Oh, Michael just likes certainty. He's one of those guys that's a materialist. He likes certainty." I'm like, and I'm sitting here thinking, well, actually, no, he doesn't, because in his books, he is careful to say things are always provisional. They're tentative. They're this, but then I see something like justified true belief in your writing. I'm like, oh, wait a minute, Michael's negating a lot of the stuff that he just said. But then
Interesting.
again,
Yeah.
I'm somebody that's noticing that, but most people probably won't. They'll just take it the practical way that you're talking about it. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah. Okay. So let's unravel some of this. So a lot of that comes in from David Deutsch's book, "The Beginning of Infinity," which I really loved.
right,
His epistemology, I'd say, is pretty close to mine. So, but I'm not sure we're talking about different things. Really, it's just what should I believe? Well, why do I have to believe something? Well, okay, what do you mean by that word? I guess I wouldn't say I believe in evolution. Evolution, it just is a fact of nature.
right.
A fact in that kind of sense. There's enough evidence that it's rational for you to offer your provisional assent. It's possible the whole thing is wrong. Probably not at this point.
Right.
Again, because we've accumulated, a century and a half of, massive amount of evidence. It would be surprising if it wasn't true in the most general sense that we accept that, and it wouldn't topple from one falsification fact, because you'd have to be really careful that that thing you found is really what you think it is.
Mm-hmm.
It's like Gould used to quote Gish, who quoted some geology textbook that says, if you stop at this road cut on Highway 70 in Colorado and you look and you see the older beds are on top of the newer beds based on the fossils. So obviously, these evolutionists got it all wrong. But then Gould goes to the textbook. It says, but if you get out of your car and walk over to the bed, the road cut, you can see that the bed has been flipped. It's one
Right.
of these things where the bedding comes up this way over millions of years and gets flipped upside down. And every geologist knows about this. You have to account for that. You have to know something about geology. Oh, okay. Right. So, or like the BEM experiment about ESP, backward causality, and again, this was a published paper in a peer-reviewed journal by a respected social scientist who said that, but in so many words, 400 years of physics was wrong since Newton, and
Mm.
that time can actually go backwards, and people can perceive things, extrasensory perception, and even anticipate what's going to happen before it happens in a statistically significant way above chance. This was his argument.
Mm-hmm.
Like, wow, okay. Now what? Well, this never survived the replication crisis. And in fact, it triggered the replication crisis. No one was able to replicate it. And several people tried and found just the opposite, in fact. and they had a Trump, this Richard Wiseman and, oh, who's the other guy? Darn, sorry. They
Oh
actually
no.
ran the exact same experiments and submitted them to the same journal, and the journal said, "No, we don't want to publish, replications. Those are boring." It's like, but we found the
Right.
opposite. So again, what are the chances that a social scientist running this experiment where he's showing porn pictures to undergraduates is
Mhm.
right and all of physics is wrong? Okay,
Right.
maybe there's something wrong with the experiment, or just like the one where neutrinos are traveling faster than light. It
Right.
turns out it
Yeah.
was a problem in the electrical system of the recording device, something like that. Okay, it's good that it's published in a peer-reviewed journal, and so let's have a debate. But before you go rewriting the textbooks, hang on, let's just wait and see if it's replicable and so on. So again, we just in that Bayesian way. See, I
Mm.
do think so. I don't think science operates in a Popperian way. Scientists are not actually trying to falsify their hypotheses. They're testing them, but what they're hoping to do, and what they often do, is they accumulate more and more evidence in
Mm.
a Bayesian way. They keep kind of raising their credence based on their priors that they keep adjusting. Another experiment, another experiment, another experiment, and so they're not proving their theory, because there could always be an exception. The black swan could be there,
Right.
but they're gaining confidence. Like, I'm pretty confident now. In this other lab, he found the same thing, and this lab over here, this guy doesn't like me. He wants to debunk me, and he found the same thing I found. So now I'm really confident that it's true, right? And I think that's how. And not only do scientists operate that way, we think brains operate that way.
Mm.
That we're constantly making adjustments and predictions about the world, little hypotheses about how the world works when we walk around, and our brains are constantly updating. Well, what's the latest information? What should I expect next to happen based on what's already happened? That's a Bayesian kind of calculation. We think even neurons do that
Mm.
when they're deciding, to fire or not based on information coming from other neurons. It's kind of a Bayesian calculation that these neurons are making. It's an interesting idea. But in any case, I think, it doesn't have to be one or the other epistemology of science. It's just interesting ways of thinking about how scientists operate, but I think it's more Bayesian. And
Yeah. Well, Deutsch even says that induction actually, he gets this from Popper. Popper says that induction doesn't even exist. There
right.
is no induction, and he solves the problem of induction, which is just everything's conjecture and refutation.
Yeah.
Uh, Basically, and you look at the Einstein thing, that Einstein didn't actually view um he didn't see that like the warping of space-time. He literally was creative about this. He thought, I don't know how he went, but it would have been something like, I think maybe that it's not forces that's keeping us on the ground. I think that it's that space is actually
Yes.
warped, but he's
Right.
not there's no induction happening. He's literally
Yes.
guessing, and this goes to Feynman said this, we make guesses, and then if we test those guesses, and if they're true, great. If not, then we get rid of them. And I think that that was
Yeah.
very Popperian of Richard Feynman. And you actually cite that in one of
I
your
do,
books.
but I've been rethinking that quote. If it disagrees with the experiment, it's wrong. It doesn't matter, how beautiful your guess is, what his name is, how
Right.
beautiful, whatever. It's just wrong. Well, but it does matter socially. If it's a paper by Einstein, you are going to take it a little more seriously. Now, in the
Mm.
end, you got to have the data, or else you're just wrong. But at least you get a hearing if you're famous.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think that, yeah, for all practical purposes, it's like science doesn't adhere to authority. There are no authorities in science. However, we do have experts like Einstein. And
Well,
if,
see, expertise does matter. I was just reading
right.
Tom Nichols' book of expertise, rereading it, second edition, and yeah, it matters. It's still,
Mm.
the doctors. You want to go to a doctor that has some expertise, right? And
Right.
the climate scientist or the vaccine expert, or expertise really does matter. And this idea that that we all have our own truths,
Oh yeah,
and
no.
this is just not. It's just not good. And that's the Tucker Carlson problem. Back to that that you brought up. It's like, oh, I just think there's no evidence. There is no evidence of Darwin. What do you know about it? I mean, have you
Right. Right.
just go take a class? Go to the teaching company and they have courses on evolution. You just pick up a book.
Yes. Yeah. That's
There's just
actually,
tons of evidence.
yeah, and it's funny how people, we literally have this at our fingertips now, and you'll still talk to people and they just don't. I'm like, you can Google that right now and
Yeah,
like just
right,
see it. I don't
right.
and then that's when actually the conspiratorial mind will kick in with some people and they'll say, well, that's them, whoever they is, just putting that information on there. They're controlling things. I'm like, well, how am I supposed to talk with you when you're not allowing any of my points to land? I mean, it's just
Mm,
you want all confirmation and you're not
hmm
letting anything hit. I mean, this is
hmm
like I'm trying not to play by those rules. I want to play by the rules, which is show me something. If I see the evidence, great. If not, then I'm just not going to go with it. But, it's very frustrating.
And it's
Um,
always okay to just say, I don't know. I'm not convinced by your argument, but I'll keep an open mind. Let's show me if you find something, let me know. So I've been telling the ufologists, the UAP people online constantly for the last several years. I'm not closed to the idea. It could be, but
mm,
is that really the best you have? Is this grainy video? Is there
yeah.
anything else? I mean, there's what, I don't know how many billions of smartphones with cameras are there in the world now, and you
Right.
still have no good footage, no clear photos, nothing.
Where are the photos of the ghosts, by the way? Like where,
Yeah,
people, I saw a ghost. I'm like, again, you say that Neil deGrasse Tyson said this too. He's like, how about next time you see a ghost, please take a picture of it.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
you have a
Well, they will
4K
say
camera.
something like, "Well, here I was taking a picture at this graveyard, and here's this little lens flare." I mean, the ghost.
Right. Yeah.
They're always lens flares. Yeah, same thing with the UAPers. Most of those effects are from camera effects.
Right. Well, I've kept you for an
Oh yeah,
hour.
I got my own
Yeah.
podcast coming up here. All right.
Yeah. Yeah, this has been awesome. And if anybody wants to read Michael Shermer, please do it. It will inoculate you against craziness and madness, and that's awesome. Michael
All right.
Shermer, thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
man.
Thank you. All right.
Bye.